Hello, you're watching Context. I'm Orkhan Amashov here. Now that the preliminary outcomes of the 5-hour meeting between Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev and Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan are in the public domain and a foreign ministry press statement is duly issued, it's an opportune moment to engage in a deeper, more comprehensive and sober discussion on what has been achieved, where we stand and what might be in the pipeline. Well, much has been made of the truly bilateral nature of this meeting, its directness, and the fact that it marks the very first full-scale interstate dialogue between Baku and Yerevan. The optics, the sheer duration of the meeting, and the number of officials accompanying both leaders added to the uniqueness of the occasion and its corresponding significance. Although we know very little about the actual substance of the discussions, what was said and possibly agreed, the identical foreign minister statements issued by both sides offer only limited specifics. Nevertheless, the prevailing interpretation appears to be that the meeting generated a form of breakthrough in the making, albeit one unlikely to be disclosed in immediate terms. The Azerbaijani side has given absolutely no indication of retracting its fundamental demand concerning the Armenian constitution, yet there has been some talk of the parties discussing the initialing of the peace treaty, an element not actually present in the foreign ministry press releases, but one that has found its way into the public domain as a preliminary outcome of the Abu Dhabi meeting attributed to government sources. If indeed the treaty or certain parts of it are to be initialed, that would imply that the agreed provisions have been reviewed and locked in and no longer subject to alteration. While initialing does not amount to formal signing, it may serve as an important step in that direction. Another central issue is connectivity, of course, and particularly the Gaza corridor. One preliminary tentative takeaway from the post-meeting statements is that the opening of communication links between Baku and Yerevan now appears to fall exclusively within the remit of their bilateral engagement, and with the last very final vestige of Russian involvement apparently being removed. And joining me now in the studio for a post-meeting analysis is Rusif Huseynov, Director of the Topchubashov Center. Rusif, welcome to Context.
Good afternoon, Orkhan. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much indeed. Rusif, so this meeting is regarded as a beginning of qualitatively new stage in the Azerbaijani-Armenian peace process. What is the most remarkable thing about this meeting, you think?
Yeah. Well, Orkhan, you've covered almost everything in the introduction and left me in no room. But it's a very good question. And what makes it an important or a historic one, as many refer to it, the very meeting itself is the most important outcome, I would say, because up until now, the two leaders would meet on the sidelines of international fora or with the mediation of usually third parties. At this time, it was a direct engagement. It's a product of the bilateral process. And of course, we needed some sort of facilitation from the Emirati side, because right now the two countries still need a neutral venue to meet and to discuss. But the way it was conducted by the diplomats of two countries without the involvement of the external elements is really remarkable. And yes, you're right, we know very little in order to discuss. So whatever we say might be a little bit of speculation, and we are now trying to gather piece by piece in order to understand the full picture. But based on the photos and video footages, based on the press releases post-meeting, we can say that both sides are probably satisfied, and we may indeed expect some breakthrough in the foreseeable future.
That's very interesting. So the location, United Arab Emirates, this country is widely regarded completely neutral. Right. If you're having even direct bilateral meeting somewhere in France without any external mediator involved, that wouldn't be similar to what happened yesterday in Abu Dhabi. So the this country does not have any geopolitical, that sort of a biased, sort of vested interest in the South Caucasus favouring Azerbaijan or Armenia. That moment was mentioned. But let's talk about the backdrop. You mentioned this moment that the meeting is important. We know very little about what has been discussed and what has been agreed, perhaps. But the moment, the significance of the juncture, and the news emerged 1 week ago. Ragib Soylu published on his X platform. There was an article in the Middle East Eye. He interviewed you, by the way, and you and I and with other colleagues, with Ahmad, with Rusif and others, we were discussing whether this meeting would take place or not in the first place. And you, I remember, you said that the fact that the news emerged is in itself a very important thing. So the backdrop, the moment, is something we need to take into account very seriously. What would you say to those elements?
Yeah, exactly. I remember I spoke to you and some other colleagues when these news first emerged, and I said back then we still didn't know whether it was like the verified information or just a gossip. But my first reaction was, even if it was a gossip or a rumor, it was still important in terms of sending signals to different political capitals.
Yeah.
And that the meeting took place, I said it earlier, was a huge occasion in the bilateral Armenian-Azerbaijani process. I would like to also rewind a little bit and refer to what you said about the venue. Right now, finding a venue for continuing the peace talks and eventually signing a peace agreement is also quite important geopolitically, a little bit problematic as the process itself, because neither party wants to go to Russia to further these talks. If they go to any Western country, even the most neutral one, that would receive some sort of backlash or criticism in our northern neighbor. So Turkey, also not an option. I remember a couple of years ago, we, the members of the Azerbaijani expert community, referred to Georgia as a potential venue. But the Georgian side has its own domestic dynamics, problems inside, and it seems right now they are not ready to host the two countries, because some may feel that it's about serving tea and coffee for the negotiating parties, but sometimes it goes beyond that.
What's about signing it somewhere, in a symbolic place along the conditional border?
Oh yeah.
That would be truly bilateral by virtue of the location?
Well, actually, we have a precedent about that, because the year 1999, then Presidents Aliyev and Kocharyan, they actually met in the neutral zone, along the Armenian-Azerbaijan border. We don't know. By the way, deputy prime ministers, they usually meet along the borders.
What about, the delegations were quite extensive. We saw deputy prime ministers, we saw foreign ministers, we saw presidential aide Hikmet Hajiyev and head of the National Security Council of Armenia, Armenian Grigorian, and we know that there's bilateral contact between them, bilateral contact between foreign ministers, bilateral contact between deputy
special envoys as well.
And also, of course, special envoy Ambassador Elchin Amirbayev and also Ruben Rubinyan, who is responsible for Turkish-Armenian normalization. So key four figures of Azerbaijani and Armenian delegations, and some others, of course, that were present there. So the 5-hour meeting, Aliyev and Prime Minister Pashinyan, President Aliyev and Prime Minister Pashinyan having one-on-one conversation. 5 hours, the optics are really confidence-inducing, but the press statements issued by Azerbaijan Armenian foreign ministers, which were effectively identical, not a joint press statement, but identical press statements, revealed very little. If to be absolutely honest with you, Rusif, we were not expecting anything extraordinary coming from those diplomatic, these press statements. But still, when you read that statement and also compare it to what we heard before those statements issued, coming from government source about the discussions revolving around initialing the peace treaty. What do you think might have been agreed, actually?
First of all, about the lit information on the press release. Well, actually, this is the style of the diplomatic services of
Yeah.
both countries.
Full of diplomatic
Most
jargon,
Azerbaijan,
yeah.
of
Yeah.
course, because without much noise,
Yeah.
they like accomplishing some tasks
Yeah.
and then revealing the outcome to the public, to the international community. And as we can like look back and remember the March announcement about the peace deal text,
Yeah, certainly
or
so.
the handover of 4 Azerbaijani villages, or prior to that, remember these Armenian Azerbaijani deal about COP29?
Oh yeah, 7th of December.
Exactly. So every time we might hear, we might see some information, some sort of gossips, because there are parties who may leak certain information to the press, but usually everything happens behind the closed doors, and so far it's been quite effective. So yes, perhaps the press release came a little bit reserved, because I saw many experts in both Armenia and Azerbaijan, even average citizens, who became very, very inspired and optimistic about the upcoming peace deal. But I would certainly appreciate how the diplomats in both countries conduct this whole process, because if you really want to stick to the bilateral nature of the process, you have to keep certain elements of the negotiations behind the closed doors until they are ripe enough to present to the public.
I also remember that you mentioned the 7th of December joint statement. I remember I was in Azerbaijan. I was traveling back from Agdam back to Baku when we heard it. We were quite surprised. There was a strong element of surprise.
It came out of the blue.
Came out of the blue, and many would say that quite often in Azerbaijani Armenian dynamics, the officials, delegations work very hard behind the closed doors, and then once the critical mass is being formed, we hear something externally available to the general public. Therefore, you seem to think that actually quite a lot might have been agreed, but the officials are not revealing them. Do you think there is any particular sensibility rolling around keeping the process going on without any external interference, sort of blocking any possible external interference? Because too much success, or rather publicly announced success, could provoke some external actors to sort of react to it in a way that wouldn't be within the interest of Azerbaijan and Armenia. I say this in particular with Russia in mind.
I'm sure there are certain stakeholders, including Russia, which would like to torpedo like the whole process. And right now, given the fact that Moscow has problems with both Baku and Yerevan simultaneously, I'm sure certain political circles in the Russian capital are quite unhappy about these happenings in Abu Dhabi. Yes, the Kremlin announced they were welcoming the peace talks, but there are few people who actually believed this announcement. This is why maybe at some point in the future we might see some political groupings, maybe pro-Russian, in either country, who would try to sabotage this process. God forbid any shootouts along the border. So we try to keep our calm in these historic moments in order to boost the process, in order to make it proceed.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. We'll come back to Russia and some other external actors a bit later. I specifically want to ask about this proposition, discussions surrounding initialing of the peace treaty. I remember this discussion last year. Back then, the 2 provisions were still remaining. There was a proposal that let us initial those provisions that had been agreed upon, which does not amount to signing. Let's achieve a certain degree of legal certainty and then carry on the process. And now again, we heard this discussion revolving around initialing of the provisions that agreed upon. What do you make of this debate? It does not amount to signing, it does not require ratification, it brings in some degree of legal certainty.
Yeah. Until March of this year, we had this conversation before. We had this formula 2 + 2 + 2.
Oh yes, I recall
yes,
that.
you remember this. And the first to pair the unresolved items of the peace deal text was also agreed upon. And now, amongst the critical questions or topics, we have now the Constitution of Armenia and the Zangezur corridor thing. You also mentioned them in your introductory speech. You might add to these two other issues, the dismantling of the Minsk group, which is amongst the institutional problems, because if we want to finally end the Karabakh saga, and then the Minsk group should also be eliminated, because it is the probably only relic of the Karabakh conflict. And then we might add another issue which can be categorized as a logistical problem, which is the border demarcation and delimitation. But given the length of our border, almost 1,000 kilometers, I presume it would take us years, if not decades, to finalize this problem. But we already have some progress along the Armenia-Azerbaijan border.
And that not joint statements, sorry, identical but not joint statements coming from Azerbaijan, I mean, has mentioned this delimitation demarcation thing. And
yes, this is why I, like yourself, I tend to believe that the central questions between Armenia and Azerbaijan are the constitution of the Republic of Armenia and the Zangezur corridor.
So two extra treaty obstacles. So back to your 2+2, 2+ sort of 3-2 sort of configuration, wherein you got in treaty issues, they have been resolved. Talking about treaty itself, Armenian officials and analysts are saying that this is the Azerbaijani sort of version of Azerbaijani peace treaty. Effectively, they have Armenians, they say, we have accepted Azerbaijani version. We know that process was initially triggered in March 2022, the peace process. Azerbaijan offered 5 basic principles. If we recall, Armenia reacted with 5+1 proposal. Ultimately, this draft peace agreement is a product of Azerbaijani proposals being eventually accepted by the Armenian side. Does this process look like to you the same way as Armenians say it is?
Since I do communicate with Armenian colleagues, I know their interpretation. I know their narratives. There can be some resentment, there can be some complaints from the Armenian expert community or policymakers. I certainly believe that Azerbaijan's approach is fundamental, because we don't see this whole process, the peace deal to be signed, as something temporary. If we really want to achieve something very fundamental, which would work for decades, which can actually create a solid foundation for the rapprochement between Armenia and Azerbaijan, then eliminating certain provisions, territorial claims in the Armenian legislation towards Azerbaijan, or dismantling of the Minsk group, or providing Azerbaijan some sort of passage between the mainland and the Nakhchivan exclave, together with other communication and transport routes, they would definitely establish trust, mutual trust between the two countries, and may actually in the future create interdependence. So I always tell this to the Armenian interlocutors. By providing the Zangezur corridor, you may also receive some sort of leverage over Azerbaijan. So it can also create interdependence between the two countries. Therefore, yes, the Azerbaijani side has been very consistent on its approach, which I tend to believe is really fundamental.
Indeed. Let's move back to the subject revolving around connectivity. You read that statement coming from Foreign Office, Foreign Ministry. Does it look like that Russian participation has been somewhat conclusively removed from the agenda, and that Azerbaijan and Armenia will bilaterally decide on the nature, status and unimpededness of that particular passage?
Yeah. Indeed, the November 2020 ceasefire agreement may be outdated. We only had this one last item about the Zangezur corridor, which did not actually refer to this passage as the Zangezur corridor, remained more or less relevant. But if we switched the entire process into the bilateral one, if we squeezed out all other external powers of this process, then I think the presence of the Russian troops or peacekeeping forces or whatever contingent may also be irrelevant. Whether there can be any other third-party engagement in the connectivity projects, we will see how it looks.
Yesterday, when I was discussing it with Dr. Rusif Huseynov, our colleague and friend, he talked about international guarantees, referred to President Aliyev's earlier speeches delivered in 2024. Effectively, the logic here moves in the following way. The idea emerged in 2020 as Azerbaijan, after the Second Karabakh War, after the 44-day war, demanding this overland passage, Armenia agreeing to Russian control, and then the question being based on two fundamental linchpins, components. The passage should be unhindered, and there should be no obstacle there, and control should be provided by third party. It should be some kind of international guarantee. International guarantee, I suppose, implies some third party, whatever shape and form that third party may assume. And we talked about some sort of international presence to which both Azerbaijan and Armenia may agree to. Of course, we don't know what will happen, and we don't know what was discussed yesterday. But what's about Azerbaijan and Armenia sorting out in a bilateral way, joint control? I don't know. This idea, if to be absolutely honest with you, sprung to my mind a couple of times over the past couple of years, but I haven't seen the official confirmation of it. The joint control without any third party, and without Russia, without any other geopolitical bloc. Have you thought about this possibility?
I have indeed. That would be the ideal scenario for both sides, and actually, as we have already conversed, both parties have already achieved a lot bilaterally. We have de facto peace on the ground, and it's also the product of this bilateral approach. Having a third party as a security guarantee or as a patron for this process would be a little bit problematic, not only from our point of view, but also because the international order is also changing now. The US is disengaging from our region, obviously. The EU is trying to lick its own wounds, is trying to somehow overcome its own domestic cracks. Russia, as I said earlier, neither party would be happy with a lot of Russian involvement. And in this case, I think the ideal scenario would be either bilateral approach or some sort of Turkish engagement. And by the way, there is an interesting narrative which is emerging nowadays, both within Armenia and outside, that for Armenia too, Turkey can be the real and the true security guarantee in the foreseeable future.
Even Turkey is a third party.
Yeah.
So.
But right now, from other, if we like compare Turkey with other regional powers, that would be the most welcome actor for both Baku and Yerevan.
Very interesting proposal indeed. Talking about confidence building measures, what kind of confidence building measures could be undertaken now? You mentioned about de facto peace. So Azerbaijan and Armenia have not yet signed a peace deal. Borders remain undelimited. There is no human-to-human contact between these two countries. What could be done now when these two countries haven't yet signed a peace deal, but they still should kind of take steps and in order to augment that mutual trust? And as part of this mutual trust, they could do a lot within the realm of human-to-human contact. Do you expect any specific form of confidence-building measure proposed and being implemented this year?
Regarding the people-to-people contact or societal communication or border opening, which would mean that Armenian and Azerbaijani citizens can easily travel to each other's country, or traders from either country can go to another one in order to invest or sell their goods. Right now, it's difficult for us to imagine this right now, and therefore I think this is why big companies which are supported by the states in both Armenia and Azerbaijan should step in and start mega projects in terms of this has been discussed a lot during various track 1.5 or track 2 meetings, joint water management or gas deliveries from Azerbaijan to Armenia, or the delivery of Armenian made electricity to Azerbaijan, or creating joint, sometimes regional, if we involve the Georgian element as well, regional disaster response mechanisms. Because remember this earthquake diplomacy between Armenia and Turkey, or the floods between which hit Armenia and Azerbaijan simultaneously last year. So these type of response mechanisms would definitely bring the two societies, two states closer to each other.
Recently it has been said, this argument being articulated by Azerbaijani officials, that now we have this de facto peace based on a post-2023 order, or rather status quo, hindering on legitimacy, legality and international law. Do you think now in mid-2025 the element of active military confrontation along the conditional border is completely removed? I know it can never be completely removed, I perfectly understand that, but reasonably we can say that it completely removed from the realm of the possibility after that meeting in Abu Dhabi.
This, our whole conversation until this moment had been based on huge optimism.
Now we're just
yeah. But unfortunately, realpolitik is back in the international system. No one would expect the Russian invasion of Ukraine back, like 3 years back. Therefore, and earlier we spoke about certain groupings which could be related to external powers who would try to sabotage the peace process or torpedo all these achievements. Therefore, we should never also exclude possibility of provocations. I think both sides should be ready for some sort of provocations, if we can speak a little bit mildly.
One can't be too vigilant. One cannot be too vigilant, and perhaps the focus should be on the confidence-building measures to make sure that that element is completely removed from the realm of the possibility.
Oh yes, absolutely. As I said, we are living in a fragile neighborhood, which is neighboring two major conflicts. Yes, Iran and Ukraine, and therefore spillover to the neighboring conflicts to our region may also be a possibility. So yeah, we should always keep this in our head.
Thank you very much, Rusif. Thank you very much for this conversation. At the beginning I said deeper, comprehensive, and I mentioned one more word, sober.
Oh.
So intellectual sobriety is something that we need to take into account very seriously and implement, in particular when it comes to portentous and very critical issues such as Azerbaijani Armenian peace process. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Orkhan. Always a pleasure.
Well, that was Rusif Huseynov, director of the Topchubashov Center based in Baku. The long-awaited peace between Azerbaijan and Armenia, whatever form it may eventually assume, of course, is perfectly within the reach. There is no doubt about that. If in 2024, last year, it was the content of the peace deal that dominated the discourse. Today it is the context surrounding the agreement that occupies center stage. Of course, matters related to the Armenian constitution, the OSCE Minsk group, its dissolution and connectivity are dominating landscape. You've been watching Context, and see you very soon indeed.